Hello everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Bastian Kordyaka, and I'm currently an assistant professor at Abo Academy University in Finland. Today, I'm excited to share with you my study titled It's Not My Fault, Exploring Attributional Patterns in eSports Player Toxicity. To make it comprehensible, this talk will follow a clear structure. First, I will talk about the motivation for this work, move into related work and research, then present the methodology and the key results, and finally, the implications and the takeaways. But what's the motivation of the study? Toxic behavior, describing an umbrella term for aggressive and harmful in-game actions, is a fundamental challenge, or known for being a fundamental challenge, across a variety of multiplayer video games. While the symptoms are widely observed, the underlying psychological processes and mechanisms are still not fully understood. Attribution theory, explaining how people assign causes to outcomes, either internally or externally, offers a promising but yet underexplored lens. I also draw from two important concepts related to toxicity. First, toxic normalization, describing toxicity or how toxicity becomes accepted and tolerated within the community. And second, toxic perpetration, describing the active enactment or perpetration of toxic behaviors. The key gap of the study: we don't yet understand how attributional patterns relate to these toxic building blocks. I therefore ask two research questions. What is the relationship between player attribution and the normalization of toxic behaviors, as a first research question? And as a second research question, what is the relationship between player attribution and the perpetration of toxic behaviors? Let's briefly talk about the related work. Attribution theory has a long tradition in psychology and explains how people assign causality to events and how these shape their reactions. In sports and games, this typically plays out through internal attributions, like blaming yourself for a lack of skill, or external ones, like blaming teammates or just bad luck, or the referees in sports. Attribution bias reflects the tendency to protect self-esteem by blaming others to failure. As a theoretical framework of the study, I expected that how players explain failure during gameplay might affect their emotional responses and potentially even can increase toxic behavior, the perpetration and normalization of toxic behavior. For the purposes of the study, rooted in previous work, I differentiate between the four dimensions: locus of causality, describing the attribution of outcomes to internal factors or external factors; stability, distinguishing between permanent and temporary attributions; personal control, describing the ability to regulate outcomes through personal effort; and lastly, external control, the belief that external factors exert control over activities or outcomes. Let's talk about the methodology. As a research design, I used a cross-sectional survey targeting League of Legends players. I collected responses from 217 participants using Prolific, 217 after data cleaning. I analyze the data using stepwise multiple regression analysis, relying on psychometrically validated instruments from prior research. However, what has to be noted here that this was the first study that combined toxic normalization and toxic perpetration to ensure a disjunctive classification of items on both constructs. I conducted some additional analysis, starting with a factor analysis. After the exclusion of 3 toxic normalization items, I found a sufficient solution regarding validity of measurements as shown in the above table here. Let's talk about the results we found. The stepwise regression analysis identified locus of causality and age as significant predictors of toxic normalization, even after correction for multiple testing using the Bonferroni correction method. The stepwise regression model for toxic perpetration identified stability, personal control, age, and experience of play as relevant predictors. Implications. The findings suggest that toxicity is not a fixed personality trait, but often a situational outcome of how players explain failure. This is critical because it means that we can intervene on a level of design and can nudge attributions or potentially nudge attributions of players. Thus, game systems can reduce toxicity by promoting constructive self-blame over external blame. Theoretically, this brings attributions theory into eSports and HCI, helping to explain emotional dynamics behind toxicity. Takeaways. First, players who blame others or external factors are more prone to toxic behavior. Second, attributing failure to controllable internal causes fosters self-reflection and reduces toxicity. And third, different attribution patterns lead to distinct emotional and behavioral outcomes in team-based games. If you're interested in such research, feel free to contact me. Thank you for your attention.